I had been my father's shadow for as long as I could remember, quiet, unnoticed, always in the background, making sure the wheels of his empire kept turning. I spent years working day and night, planning, negotiating, and building things that kept his business afloat. And for what? A simple acknowledgement, maybe a thank you for all the work I'd put in, a single moment where he'd look at me and say, "You did a good job?" But instead, I got nothing. Absolutely nothing. And when I thought things might finally be different, when I thought just for once that my hard work would be seen, I walked into that room only to have everything I'd ever known come crashing down. I thought I had earned a seat at the table. I thought I would finally be recognized, maybe even given the respect I deserved. But that day, in front of his most important investors, I was humiliated, and that was when I had to make a costly decision. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let me know where you're listening from in the comments. My name is Olivia, and I was the one who made things happen at my father's company. For 7 years, I worked tirelessly behind the scenes. I ran the show, took care of everything, and made sure the deals were sealed. But in the eyes of my father, Gregory Marshall, I was just a ghost. The company was his, my sister Tiffany was his golden child, and I was just a cog in the machine that no one noticed. That day my father was hosting some important investors. As I walked into the room, I had finally convinced myself that things had to change. I had put my heart and soul into securing a deal with one of our largest investors. I'd been on calls, meetings, and making sure every detail was perfect. And for once, I thought, maybe this was the moment when my father would finally look at me and say, "You did it, Olivia. You made this happen." But I couldn't have been more wrong. I entered the conference room, and the first thing I saw was my father standing in the center of the room, speaking to his top investors, his voice full of pride. He was charismatic, confident, the kind of man who could convince anyone that he was the most important person in the room. Tiffany was there too, standing beside him in a glittering designer outfit that she had probably spent more money on than most people made in a year. She didn't care about the business. She didn't care about the hard work that had gone into making this event happen. She was just there because it was a chance to be in the spotlight, to look like she belonged. I stood there for a moment, unnoticed, waiting for my father to acknowledge me, to at least look up. But he didn't. Instead, he turned to me with a look in his eyes that I knew too well. Disappointment, disgust, and something else that I couldn't quite put into words. Then, in front of everyone, he did something I never expected. He grabbed a glass of water from the table, looked me in the eyes, and without a single word, he poured it over my head. "You don't belong in this type of gathering," he sneered, his voice cold and dismissive. My heart stopped. For a moment, everything around me was silent. The room felt like it was spinning, and I could barely hear anything over the sound of my own pulse pounding in my ears. But I couldn't let them see how much it hurt. I couldn't let them see how humiliated I felt. My father turned away, his attention already back on Tiffany, who stood there smiling like she had just won some great prize. He didn't even look at me again. And Tiffany, of course, didn't bat an eye. She just laughed, as if it was some kind of joke. There I was, standing in front of the most important people in my father's business, soaked and humiliated, my pride shattered. I had spent years working to build something that would make him proud, and yet all I was to him was an afterthought, just a failure. He didn't care about me. He never had. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell them all what was going on behind the scenes. The hours I had spent making sure their business didn't fall apart. I wanted to tell them how Tiffany had spent her time shopping, partying, and doing absolutely nothing to help. How she had no interest in the company. How my father had always treated me like I was invisible, while she was praised for being the perfect daughter. But I didn't say anything. I didn't even react. I just stood there, silent, like I always had, trying to ignore the pain that was welling up inside me. I thought I could handle it. I always had before, right? I always told myself that one day, things would change. One day, my father would realize how hard I worked. One day, he would see that I was the one who kept the business together, who made sure everything went smoothly. But in that moment, standing there, I realized something that I hadn't been willing to face before. It wasn't going to change. Not ever. No matter how much I did for them, no matter how hard I worked, they would never see me. I would always be the invisible one, the one who did all the work but was never acknowledged. They would always praise Tiffany, the golden child, while I stayed in the shadows. I felt a lump form in my throat, but I refused to let the tears fall. I had been strong for too long. I had put up with their toxic behavior, their neglect, and their belittling for far too long. And in that moment, as I stood there, drenched and humiliated, I knew something had changed. This wasn't just another disappointment. It was the final straw. I had been overlooked, dismissed, and degraded for far too long, and as much as I hated it, as much as it hurt, I knew that I couldn't keep pretending anymore. I turned and walked out of the room. I didn't care what anyone thought. I didn't care what my father or Tiffany said. I didn't even care that everyone was staring at me. I walked out, and as the door closed behind me, a fire started to burn inside me. It was a fire I hadn't known I had. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their validation. And in that moment, I made a promise to myself. I would never be the overlooked one again. I couldn't breathe. I walked out of that room, out of that event, without looking back. And yet every step I took felt heavier than the last. I wanted to scream. I wanted to shout, but I didn't. Instead, I just kept walking. I could still feel the coldness of the water dripping down my back, my clothes sticking to me like a constant reminder of everything I wasn't. I couldn't believe it had happened, that my father, my own flesh and blood, had humiliated me like that, in front of all those important people. But I was done pretending. I was done being the invisible one, the one who worked in the shadows without a single word of recognition. It wasn't the first time I'd been overlooked, dismissed, or ignored. It wasn't even the worst time. But for some reason, this moment, this final act, broke something inside me. I had spent so many years telling myself that things would change, that if I just kept working, kept pushing, eventually my father would see me, would acknowledge me, would appreciate me. But that day I knew it wasn't going to happen, not ever. I walked out of the event and got into my car. I didn't want to go home. I didn't want to face my mother's disappointment or listen to my sister's mocking laugh. So I drove. I drove for hours, the darkness outside matching the storm raging inside me. I thought about everything I had done, everything I had sacrificed. I had put my dreams on hold for this family, for my father's company. I had pushed aside my own plans, my own aspirations, all to ensure that his business stayed afloat. I built strategies, negotiated deals, kept everything running smoothly. I was the one who made it all happen behind the scenes. But it didn't matter. In his eyes, I was just another tool, another cog in the machine. Never the star, always in the background, always second to Tiffany, the golden child. I couldn't understand how he could praise her when all she did was waste money and bask in her own self-importance. She hadn't worked a day in her life for that business, but she was the one he put on a pedestal. She was the one who got the attention, the love, the validation. And I was the one who had to make it all happen without ever hearing a word of appreciation. I should have left years ago. I should have walked away when it was clear they didn't care about me. But I kept holding on. I kept convincing myself that it was all worth it, that one day my father would see me. But now, as I sat there in my car, my heart heavy with the weight of years of neglect, I realized something. I didn't need his approval. I didn't need his validation. All I needed was to believe in myself. I sat in my car for what felt like an eternity. But finally, I drove home. I walked into the empty house, the silence ringing in my ears, and I collapsed onto my bed. The phone in my hand buzzed incessantly. My father had called me, over and over. I ignored each call. My heart pounded in my chest. How could I ever face him again? How could I face the person who had made me feel so small for so long? Then my phone buzzed again, and I saw a text from Tiffany. I almost didn't want to open it, but curiosity got the best of me. "You really embarrassed yourself, didn't you?" she wrote, followed by a string of laughing emojis. "Maybe next time you'll know your place." I wanted to throw my phone across the room. How could she be so heartless? How could she not see what was happening? But then I remembered, she didn't have to see it. She didn't care. She was living in her own world, oblivious to everything I had sacrificed, everything I had given up. And my father? He was the one who allowed this. He was the one who set the stage for me to be nothing more than a background character in my own life. But then something unexpected happened. My phone buzzed again, this time with an email. It was from the investor we'd been courting for months, Robert Halston, the tech magnate. I opened the email, my heart racing as I read the words. "We've decided to pull out of the deal. We need Olivia Marshall to sign the final contract personally or the deal is off." I read the words again as if they were some kind of joke. The deal was off. Unless I showed up. The company was on the brink of losing everything, and the one person they needed, the one person they had continuously pushed aside, was me. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. For years, I had worked for this company, sacrificed my time, my energy, and my future, and yet here I was, the person they needed to save them. And I was done. I was done being their backup plan. I was done being the one who was always there, always ready to fix things when they messed up. My phone started buzzing again, this time with calls from my father and his team. They were panicking, begging me to return, to come and fix everything, but I didn't want to. I didn't owe them anything, not anymore. But then something clicked inside me. This was it. This was my chance to break free from the chains they had bound me with for so long, my chance to prove to myself that I didn't need their approval, their business, or their validation. I had built something of my own, something that didn't rely on them, and I didn't have to save their company. I didn't have to play the role of the dutiful daughter anymore. For years I had played the part. I had done everything they asked of me, quietly working behind the scenes, believing that one day they would see me. But now I realized that the very investor they were so desperate to impress was the key to my own success. Robert Halston wasn't just their last hope. He could be my ticket out, my ticket to the future I had always dreamed of, the future I had been too afraid to chase. I stood up, my heart pounding in my chest. I wasn't going back to that business. I wasn't going to save them. I was going to show them exactly what they had underestimated. I was going to build something of my own, and I would make sure they knew it. I would use everything I had learned, every connection I had made, to show them that I was more than just their invisible daughter. I could feel the anger bubbling inside me, but it wasn't just anger. It was power. Power I had been too afraid to tap into for so long. And in that moment, I realized that the time had come. I was no longer going to be the one they walked all over. I was going to be the one they would never forget. I walked back into that room with a calm that surprised even me. The same room where I had been humiliated, where I had been drenched in water and dismissed like I didn't even matter. Now, hours later, I wasn't there to save anyone. I wasn't there to fix things for them. They didn't deserve my help. They didn't deserve me. My father, the same man who had pushed me aside for years, was pacing nervously. His team was huddled in a corner, all their faces pinched with stress, their voices low but urgent. They were scrambling, trying to salvage a deal that depended entirely on me. My absence from the event had thrown everything into chaos, but not for the reasons they thought. It wasn't just the loss of the deal that mattered. It was the loss of me. The one person they had underestimated, the one person they had taken for granted, was no longer at their beck and call. I could see the desperation in their eyes as they noticed me standing in the doorway. The panic in my father's expression was unmistakable. "Olivia," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Where have you been? We need you. Robert won't sign the deal unless you show up." But I wasn't here for that. I wasn't here to save them. I wasn't going to put my life on hold for them again. I had spent far too long being the invisible, silent worker behind the scenes, and I wasn't going to fall back into that role. I stepped into the room, my heels clicking sharply against the floor. I could feel their eyes on me, waiting for me to do something, to come to the rescue as I always had, but I wasn't their savior anymore. "Where is Robert Halston?" I asked, cutting through their tension. My voice was steady, calm, almost colder than I felt. They were all staring at me now, unsure of what I meant. "What?" my father asked, still not fully grasping the change in the air. "I'm not here for the company," I continued, my words deliberate, my gaze steady. "I'm here for my own deal." The silence in the room was deafening, my father's face twisted in confusion, but I wasn't going to explain myself. They had never bothered to understand me. Why should I offer them an explanation now? I walked past them, ignoring the way my father's team looked at me like I was making a huge mistake. I knew what I was doing. I knew what I was about to set into motion. When I reached Robert Halston, he was standing by the window, his back turned to the chaos in the room. He looked up at me as I approached, his face still tense from the frustration of the situation. "Mr. Halston," I said, my voice smooth and confident, "I'm Olivia Marshall. I'm sorry for the confusion earlier, but I'm the one you need to speak with." Halston raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by my presence. "You're Olivia? The one they've been trying to get a hold of?" I nodded, feeling a rush of power that I hadn't felt in years. "Yes. I'm the one they've been overlooking for far too long." I could see him processing my words, his eyes scanning me with a new interest. For the first time, I felt like I had his full attention. I wasn't the background player anymore. I wasn't just the daughter of a man who didn't appreciate me. I was someone who had something real to offer. "I've spent years behind the scenes, making sure everything ran smoothly for my father's company," I continued, my voice steady but resolute. "But they never saw me. They never acknowledged the work I put in. Instead, they focused on my sister, the one who's never cared about the business." I paused for a moment, watching as Halston's expression shifted from casual disinterest to genuine curiosity. The way he looked at me was different now. I could tell he was starting to understand. "I've been building my own vision for the future," I said, "one that aligns perfectly with your interests. I've got a plan, a strategy that can bring in the kind of returns you're looking for. It's not tied to my father's failing business, it's mine, and I'm ready to take it to the next level." Halston took a moment to process my words, his brow furrowing as he weighed his options. The tension in the room was palpable. Behind me, I could feel my father's eyes on my back, the panic rising in his chest as he realized that he wasn't the one calling the shots anymore. "I'm not asking you to walk away from your investment," I continued, "but I'm offering you something better, a real opportunity, one that I've been quietly building behind the scenes, just like I've done for years with my father's business, but without the toxic environment." I watched as Halston's face shifted from uncertainty to a quiet recognition. He knew what he was looking at now. He knew I was the one with the vision, the one with the drive. It wasn't my father's company that had impressed him. It was me. "I'm listening," he said finally, his tone shifting to one of genuine interest. In that moment, I knew I had him. I wasn't just selling an idea, I was showing him my strength, my capability, and my independence. This wasn't just a business deal, this was me taking control of my life for the first time, showing everyone, my father, my sister, everyone, that I didn't need them to be successful. The deal was sealed, but it wasn't for my father's business. It wasn't for the empire he had built on my back. It was for me, for my own vision, for my own future. As I left the event that started with an humiliation and later changed my life, I felt the weight of the moment settle over me. My father's calls started flooding my phone, his voice frantic, his words begging me to come back, to fix everything, but I wasn't interested in fixing anything for him. I had built something of my own now, and it was far better than anything they could ever offer me. I left the room without a word, my heart pounding with excitement and relief. I had done it. I had stepped out from the shadows and into the light, and as I walked away from everything they had built, I realized something. I didn't need them. I never had. In the days that followed, I watched as my father and sister scrambled to salvage the remnants of their business, but their desperate attempts didn't matter anymore. I was no longer the one they could control. I was the one they needed, but then it was too late. I had become the success story they had never believed in, the one they had underestimated, and now I was finally free. Thanks for listening to the end. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more.